All right, I'm just setting up right now, so just give me 1 second here, okay? And we'll start in a couple minutes. All right, here we go. Good. All right, I hope everyone's doing well, by the way. And please let me know about the sound if the sound doesn't sound good. And we'll go from there. So again, I'm just setting up. And it's a little bit early, but anyway, good morning. Or Matthew, greetings, my friend. How are you doing? What's going on? SJS Films. Hello, how are you doing, my friend? I just saw you posted another, is it a Masters of Cinema video? I haven't seen it yet, but I can't wait to check it out. All right, sorry about this. I'm just setting up. And, okay. I hope June is treating you well. And that I can't believe it's already the middle of June. Can you believe it? Time certainly flies, my friends. Time flies. And okay, great. So I'm just setting up my computer, and I see our friend Genealogy Matt is here, and Skytrap ASMR. Good evening from the UK. Yes, good evening. Good morning. And Isaac, hello. Hello, it's nice to see you all. Oh, great. Great. Just setting up here. And and Peter, hello. Peter, how are you doing? Wolfgratz, hello, Wolfgratz. I was just reading I was just going over the comments that I woke up and I was just looking at some of the comments I received while I was asleep. And I think I received one from Wolfgratz about, what was it, about, Leonard Leff, I think. It was about pronunciation issues. So I thought that was a great comment, but I'll respond in kind later in the week. So, okay, okay, all right, Wolfgratz, thank you very much. And Paula, hello, Paula, how are you doing? And great. I hope you guys are doing well. It's really nice to see you. So let's see. It's now 6 o'clock. I see by my clock, and so why don't we start the show? Excuse me. I'm just going to adjust the camera here, so it's going to be a little bit. That's better. Sorry about that. I should have done this earlier, but. And actually, just give me one moment while I just close the window here. So excuse me. We'll start in a minute. All right. I think that's a little bit better. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Again, I'm so sorry. I should have done these things before, but okay, there we go. All right, so let's see, and we see Compton Reject, hello, and Jared, hello. So it's nice to see you. Okay, my friends, so let's get started here with the next film club live stream discussion. So greetings from Tokyo. I hope all of you are doing very well, and thank you very much for joining. And it's so nice to see you. Today, I want to talk to you about the film Rebecca, 1940 Rebecca. So hopefully that means that you have seen the film and that you can talk about it in the live chat and talk to each other and talk to me, and I will talk. And starring Joan Fontaine and Laurence Olivier. and Judith Anderson. And so, yeah, this is Rebecca. So let's get started. I guess the first place I wanted to go is, oh, before we get started, I should also say one thing. Of course, you can talk about any detail of the film you want. It's assumed that you'll have seen the film. So any specific plot point you want to discuss, it's fair game. Any ending detail you want to discuss, of course, that's fair game. I probably won't be addressing any other films here. I know sometimes there might be questions about other films, but I'll probably just gloss over them and maybe save them for another day if it's appropriate. Also, I'm not necessarily going to talk in detail about any specific production background history. This isn't meant to be an overview of the production of the film or anything like that. I am not, I don't claim to be any kind of historical scholar with respect to the production details of this film. I don't at all claim to have any direct connection with this film. So anything I would say, anything anyway, would just be essentially what I heard or what I read from the Criterion release or something like that. So my suggestion, generally speaking, is that if you, of course, if you want to talk about it amongst yourselves in the live chat, that's great. I encourage that. But what I am going to bring up from my point of view is not necessarily any production history stuff directly. So if you have any questions about that, or if you want to know more about that stuff, I would suggest as a great starting point, you can go to the supplemental materials from the Criterion Collection release, and then go from there. And also, Hitchcock scholarship is generally readily available, and the scholarship is quite deep. And there are many people who are writing about Hitchcock in the world, and so I think you can find so many resources at your disposal, and some of them in print, perhaps many of them now online. So in any event, that's my general course of plan as far as today's live stream is concerned. So I hope that's okay with you. And one more thing before I get started. Also, please note that this is not meant to be the complete discussion of the film and then that's it. This is just meant to be a kind of a jumping off point, of course. So when this live stream ends, that doesn't mean that the conversation has to, it can continue on and you can go from there. And in fact, my friends, I would even suggest, if you are so inclined or interested, for those of you who are on YouTube, and I'm assuming that you are on YouTube because you are accessing this via YouTube, you can always have your own live stream film club discussion chat about any film that you want. I mean, the films that exist in the world are so plentiful and numerous and so varied that I would even suggest that, among there are people here who are on YouTube who can, it's very easy to host a live stream chat and to have people join and talk about a film. I think it's really interesting to do this sort of format. So if you're interested, please set up a film club live stream chat and invite me. I'd love to join and talk about a film that you're interested in talking about. So anyway, so that's that. And let's get going with this film, Rebecca, shall we? So. And what I wanted to do is I want to ask you the question, which is this. What do you think of the film Rebecca? What do you think of this film? The reason why I ask is because I find that this film is... I came to this film when I was very young. When I first watched this film, I saw it on a VHS tape. Very young. I must have been maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 or something like that when I first saw this film. I was very, very young when I saw this film. And it was because I think my mother or my father purchased a VHS tape of this from W.H. Smith's, I think. It was a W.H. Smith store or something like that when we were living in the United Kingdom at the time. And so that was my first exposure to this film. And I didn't know what to make of it, to be perfectly honest, because, again, I was young and I was very impressionable, but I was at the age where I was looking for something that had a lot of excitement, a lot of chases, a lot of action sequences or something like that. And the idea of that kind of suspenseful film was so exciting for me with other Hitchcock films that when I saw Rebecca, I was a little bit underwhelmed, to be perfectly honest, at my very young age when I first saw the film. And I admit that I was probably, well, not probably, I certainly was not at the the right frame of mind to be able to kind of get it or appreciate it. But yeah, it seemed to me a bit underwhelming at the time. But then, of course, it was something that I watched over and over again, and it grew into something that I just cherished because I started to remember many of the moments of the film, and I started to retain some of those memories. And so, and then I guess naturally just grew to love it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it just was something that was so near and dear to me because it was something that I knew from a very, very young age. And it was always there for me. And so, I don't know, I don't know what you have to say about this, but what is it about Rebecca that you like or don't like? I mean, I guess more importantly, or just more fundamentally, do you like this film, Rebecca? And it's okay if you don't like this film, because talking about a film doesn't mean that you always have to like something, right? But do you like this film? And what is the point of this film, right? What is the point of watching this film? Is it a screen entertainment? Is it a lovely, mysterious romance? Is it something? Is it speak to you at a deeper level, a more personal level, a more intimate level, or is it something that is just a fun time at the movies, so to speak? And I think, or anything else. And I think any kind of response that you have is legitimate and appropriate and very it's completely appropriate. So I guess that's my general question to sort of throw out there at the outset. So what do you think of this work as we go forward? So let me just throw that out there to you, and let's go from there. So let me return to the chat for a second, and I see All Things Film. Hello, it's great to see you. Jeff Pixler, hello, how are you doing? And so Jared says, so this is truly a fantastic film. I didn't watch the special features, but I might do so after the stream. So this is very good. So Jared, we have already someone who thinks this is a fantastic film, a great film. And All Things Film adds, yes, I just rewatched this film this afternoon to refresh my memory. A damn fine film indeed. Yes, okay, excellent. And Paul Emery, hello, Paul. He says, Hitch certainly put his best foot forward for his first American production. Great. And David Pryor, hello. Oh, great. And Rob Tapscott says, hello. It's okay. You don't worry. Don't worry about being late. It's great to see you. You said, it's been so long since I've seen it, I forgot how good it was. And Ruthie Hen Shall Fall 99, one of the best films ever made, with winning performances by Joan Fontaine, Laurence Olivier, George Sanders, and Judith Anderson. Excellent, Ruthie Hen Shall Fall 99. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Ruthie Hen Shall Fan 99. Excuse me. So thank you very much for that. And yes, you bring up the award-winning performances. So the performances are really great, and I'll talk about those hopefully in a moment. So thank you so much. I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name. I really apologize for that. Yes, and then Jared mentions the fact that this was the only film by Hitchcock to ever win the Academy Award for Best Picture. And yes, and Melinda, hello. Yes, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for this. The super chat, completely unnecessary, but thank you so much. Thank you so much, Melinda. I hope you're doing well and take good care of yourself. And I'll talk to you soon. My dear friend Melinda, our dear friend Melinda, she's one of the best. And so Tim asks, how long did you live in the UK? Oh yeah, so I just was there for when I was a little kid because my father was, I think, because of his work. So not for very long, for about 4 years or so. We were there during the tail end of Margaret Thatcher's prime ministership, and so it was the late 80s, early 90s or so. So and then we were in Surrey. So not far from London, so we lived in Surrey. So we lived in Guildford for a little bit and Woking for a little bit. But yes, and okay, this is good. So Wolfgrat says it's a very atypical Hitch for newbies. This is very interesting. I'd be interested to see what you mean by that, Wolfgratz. But I agree with you. And Peter, I think, adds, I look at it as a very realistic ghost story. Very interesting. So these are ghost stories. So there is this gothic feel, right? Because we're dealing with a large house and this kind of mystery in a large house. And the ghost, as it were, is probably the ghost of Rebecca, although it's not directly, of course, a supernatural film, but or it doesn't have supernatural overtones directly, but implicitly, perhaps, there is a sense of Rebecca, who is, of course, dead by the time the film starts, haunting the film and haunting the characters, and perhaps even in the case of Mrs. Danvers, perhaps even possessing the characters in a kind of metaphorical sense, perhaps. But yes, it does have a ghost story type of feel. The fog and the music and the water and everything is kept as it is, before Rebecca died, and so there is a very creepy element to it. It's almost as though, people like Mrs. Danvers, she's trying to preserve the corpse of Rebecca by preserving everything that Rebecca had when she was alive. When the Joan Fontaine character goes into Rebecca's room, the West Wing, and she sees which is in a creepy scene, right? She sees Mrs. Danvers. Everything has been preserved to sort of protect and to respect the memory of the Rebecca, and it's just a creepy scene. So there is a ghost story element to it. Yes, you're absolutely right. Jared says, I found Rebecca to be fairly haunting due to the fact that the house has stayed pretty much the same after she died, but new life is brought into the place when De Winter's new wife arrives. Yeah, so I think I've echoed what you said, Jared, but I think you said it much better than I could have done. So thank you very much. Great. And let's see. Isaac says, I caught the film last year at the cinema during a Hitchcock season, was very surprised by its uniqueness in contrast to the rest of Hitchcock's career. I do like it a lot, love the gothic atmosphere. Yes, so I think people are now speaking to this like a gothic film, a sort of scary, almost ghost-like, haunting film. And Compton Reject says, I really enjoyed it. I saw it for the first time this year, right after I saw Phantom Thread, and loved the similarities in tone. Yes, great. And Genealogy, Matt says, atmospheric, almost gothic, with excellent cinematography, acting, and directing. It is well liked. Yes. Tim Holmes says, I like gothic films, so yes, I love this. Not as great as Hitchcock's later work, but still wonderful. That's a very interesting point, and looking at Rebecca in the context of Hitchcock's career, I think is very important. But yes. Okay, let me just go to Peter says, two things though. I would have fired the head servant on the spot after the dress incident. You're talking about the masquerade ball, right? He never said anything to Mrs. De Winter about how Rebecca had actually worn that. Yeah, that's a really good point. But I suppose that comes up just before the discovery of Rebecca's body, right? And it's and all that stuff about what happened to Rebecca and the boat and all that, and then the truth comes out between Maxim and the Joan Fontaine character about what actually happened and how Maxim actually felt about Rebecca. And so perhaps she never really thought about it again, and it became a moot point. But you're absolutely right, Peter. Yeah, and then you also mentioned the fire at the end has been so overused in film. Still a great film. Yeah, that's a good point. It does have a bit of a, maybe not cliche, but there is but I don't know. At the same time, I think the fire element is really great because it does have a cleansing act to it. But very fair point. Very fair. And SJ's film says, I like the film, but it is still one of my least favorite Hitchcock films. I find the, oops, I lost the comment, sorry. I just find the first hour quite uninteresting. That is really a great point. And let me just jump off there for a second. SJ's films brings up a great point. The first hour is the least interesting. That's interesting to me because I think what you're referring to, SJS, is the fact that the second half is going into the mystery element, right? Or not mystery element, it's going into sort of detective mode, so to speak. Like what actually happened to Rebecca, and the truth comes out about what kind of person Rebecca really was, at least how Maxim describes it to his wife, the Joan Fontaine character. So that's very interesting to me. Personally, I have the opposite feeling. I feel that the first half is the strongest element, and that the second half, I think, is, well, I don't find the second half least interesting, but I find it to be a slightly different tone. It has a slightly different tone to it. I really like the first half because there is just something. How shall I put it? The reason why I brought up at the beginning about what's the point of watching this film for me is because I always thought about that. Why am I so interested in this film? I've always thought about that, and I never had quite an answer, but I might have a few possibilities here, and I just wanted to go through those and see what you thought about it, which was, for me, I've never lived in that, like a huge mansion house. I've never had to deal with, people like Mrs. Danvers who are really obsessed with someone who is dead and not having to deal with that kind of housekeeper or anything like that. So my direct experience is it's probably non-existent when it comes to the plot elements of this film, right? But I still have great engagement with this for some reason. And I think it has to do with, well, for one thing, it speaks to me because there's this idea about anxiety that I feel when I'm dealing with someone else. What is that other person actually thinking about? What is this other person actually thinking about in his or her own mind or in his or her own heart? He or she might say something to me that might suggest what it is he or she is thinking about, but I will never really know what that person is thinking about or feeling. And that creates a kind of anxiety in me sometimes, right? So I feel like that anxiety is embodied almost perfectly within the scope of the first part or the first half or the first hour, I don't know, of the film Rebecca, right? Because the Joan Fontaine character is so anxious. What does Maxim think and feel? That's what she wants to know. And she has a certain idea, and she has certain impressions based on what other people around her say, Mrs. Van Hopper and Maxim's friends, and of course Mrs. Danvers. But right, she hasn't really gotten a sense really of what Maxim really thinks. She has an idea of what he might think, but there is that sort of almost impenetrability, if you will, of knowing what the other person thinks and feels, which is why, of course, that scene uh, between the two of them later in the film, when he actually reveals what it was that he actually felt about Rebecca, right? You thought I loved Rebecca. You thought that. I hated her. Dun 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 dun. Right. So that's the to me that always is such a key moment, right? Because it's suddenly the floodgates are open, and it's really in many ways I think the climax of the film. But I think it represents to me this aspect of the first hour, which is there's so much anxiety built up about what Maxim is actually thinking. Does he really love her? Can I ever live up to Rebecca's reputation? No, I can never do that. I'm going to try, but I can't do that. And just anxiety just builds and builds and builds. But really, it's sourced in the fact that she doesn't know what he is thinking or he is feeling throughout that first hour. And I love that. I love that. And that's a way for the film, or for me, to directly connect with the film. It's a way for me to, as an in, as it were. So that's why I think it has a certain significance for me watching this film, because it seems to be an example or an embodiment of a kind of emotional anxiety. It could even be it probably is an anxiety that is based in some degree anyway on maybe an emotional jealousy of the other, maybe a sexual jealousy of the other, not necessarily being able to live up to the reputation that has been built over many, many years of someone who once was alive but is now dead, etc. So the film is, to me, a perfect embodiment of anxiety. And we see this in little things in Joan Fontaine's performance. The way she's fidgeting a little bit, stop biting your fingernails, the way in which she's just trying to, she looks very, the way she's framed in when she's in Manderley, right? She's almost dwarfed by her surroundings. When she goes into the study and picks up the phone and talks on, she looks very childlike, and she looks so small. There's just something very overbearing and powerful about that. She's trying to live up to something that she has no hopes of no chance really of being able to live up to, and that adds to the further tension and anxiety and stuff. So what am I saying? So this is kind of another related through line for me into how I can relate to the film, which is, trying to live up to something that it's almost impossible to achieve. And Mrs. De Winter, the new Mrs. De Winter, is trying so desperately to do that, and trying to live up to whatever it was is the memory of Rebecca that everyone so cherishes. And the reason being primarily is she wants Maxim's affections. And so, so it all comes back to this idea of what Maxim is thinking. What is he thinking? And what's so great about that, I think, is this brings me to the performances of Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine. I'm not right. I haven't seen all of Laurence Olivier's films, and so, but I think here he is the perfect. He's almost no nonsense. It's like let's get on with it kind of thing. You see this when at the beginning in the scenes with Mrs. Van Hopper. You see this when we get to Manderley, and he's just kind of no nonsense. And I love that because it doesn't give us enough. It doesn't give us too much about him, and it makes him, he's sort of standoffish, which I think is perfect for this idea of generating more anxiety within the Joan Fontaine character, and thus anxiety within us, because we want to know what he thinks, but we're not quite sure. We can never understand what it is he's thinking, and that makes the anxiety levels rise even more, and it just adds to this idea of that, I don't know, what is it? It's sort of the existential crisis, if you will, not existential crisis, but it's more like the crisis of not ever really knowing about what the other is really thinking. And so, and we will never know. I mean, all we know is what someone tells us, but we will never have access to the direct thoughts and feelings of the other person. So, in some ways that's good. Some ways that leads to this level of anxiety and suspense. Right? So, and I believe that Laurence Olivier's performance really brings that home. He's standoffish. He sort of says, "Let's get on with it," kind of attitude. But when he expresses anger, he's snappy, but he doesn't explode with emotion. So there's always a wall of coldness there, and we realize the reason for that later in the film when he expresses the real reasons and his real feelings about Rebecca, of course. But I truly think that his performance is perfect for this notion of creating anxiety and trying to understand, but never truly being able to understand the feelings and thoughts and notions of the other. And that's exactly why Joan Fontaine's performance is perfect. It is so perfect because she is always on edge, at least during that first part of the film. She's always on edge. She's always fidgeting. She seems to be nervous. You can tell when she seems to be breathing, or you can almost feel her heartbeat beating fast, and it's a kind of it's a great performance because if she's on edge, then we are on edge, or I am on edge, and that adds to that level of anxiety and tension that really pervades that first hour of the film, I think, for me anyway. And so I that's my general take on the first hour, and that's my general take about why I think this film, at least for me, has the potential for having maybe I can have a direct experience with this film, and also, of course, enjoy it as a kind of a romance tale, as a tale about this couple, etc. But in terms of a film about anxiety and about trying to understand the other. And that can be in any context for me, whether it's in a romantic relationship or whether it's a relationship between friends or something like that, or family perhaps. There is always this anxiety that can potentially exist, right? What is the other person thinking? I will never really know, but anyway. So that's my general take on that. So let me just stop there and let's return to the chat. And let's see. So the... again, if I skip over your comment, I apologize, but let's see here. So returning to the chat where I was. So RavenQ222 says, Rebecca has grown on me over the years to become one of my favorite Hitchcock works. And Tim Holmes says, I think Joan Fontaine is quite an underrated actress. At least I feel like she is not well remembered these days. That's interesting. Maybe, I'm not sure. I mean, I really adore Joan Fontaine. When I was I said I watched this film as a little kid. I had, and still do, I have a huge crush on Joan Fontaine. She is fantastic in this film. And if what you say is true, that she doesn't have as a wide maybe not many people know about her, or she's underrated. I certainly hope that changes because she is great, absolutely great. Jeff says, I love this film. I like the ideas of someone's memory lingering behind like a ghost that overshadows everything and that you feel you can never live up to. And Tim Holmes says, side note, Joan Fontaine was born in Japan. Yes. And in fact, I think she went to school, or at least part of her education was spent in a school that is it's not so far from where I live, actually. But and Paula says, I love Judith Anderson in this so much. Such a great foreboding performance. I agree this movie was very different for Hitchcock. In some ways, it doesn't even feel like a Hitchcock movie. Paula, thank you so much for reminding me about this. Judith Anderson as Mrs. Danvers I think that is the other key of this film. Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine, of course, but Judith Anderson forms the other essential element of the triumvirate. And then, of course, there's the idea of Rebecca herself, right? But in terms of the acting, Mrs. Danvers, right? Mrs. Danvers, the way she walks, she is almost floating. It's like she herself is this ghost or zombie, and the way her face registers, when you see the film again, or when I saw the film recently, I just noticed her eyes, the way her eyes move, or the way in which they never seem to open up. They never open up until, in fact, I think the only time that they really kind of widen, right? They're always just like this. They're just subdued, but there's a menace and almost hatred that's behind the eyes, and they never open up except for I think 2 moments in the film. The first moment, I think, and if there are more moments, please let me know. But the ones I remember are the moment where she is showing the new Mrs. De Winter Rebecca's room, and she's like, I think there's a moment where she's showing the see-through undergarment, and you can see my hand through it, and there's this real creepy fascination with all this physical sort of paraphernalia that existed and that represents Rebecca's existence. And then there's the moment where after the whole disaster of the masquerade ball, and she confronts Mrs. Danvers about it. Mrs. Danvers takes her to the window, and she just says, why don't you? Trying to ease her into this incredibly dangerous situation. You can see there's a moment when we see Mrs. Danvers' face. I think that line is sort of spoken over close-up shots of Mrs. De Winter, so we don't actually see her lips move. Mrs. Danvers' lips move as she's saying those words. Why don't you? I think, but we then look at her face, or there's a moment when we see Mrs. Danvers' face, and we see her eyes are just like, I think her eyes are open wide, and she's really intent on, in essence, trying to murder Mrs. De Winter. And then there's the moment at the end of the film where Manderley is alight and it's just burning down, and we just get a close-up of her face, and she's looking up, and she's just in this strange moment. It's almost like she has lost her mind or something, but she's just lost, and it's almost like her face is registering, I wouldn't say fear, but it's almost like almost like a contentment, or maybe resigned to her fate, but she seems almost happy. It's almost like there's a smile on her face, kind of. But as the camera moves up towards her face, just before the ceiling crumbles and just crushes her, her eyes are wide open like this, and it's like this. But for the rest of the time, she is just subdued, and she doesn't smile, and she has a very stern tone, and everything is, she glides across the floor like I don't know, like maybe I don't think ghost is the right word. Maybe it's a specter. Maybe it's like a kind of undead thing. Maybe it's like an insect, crawling insect, or something like that. All these images are conjured up when I think about Mrs. Danvers and Judith Anderson's physicality, and the way in which she is preserving the memory of Rebecca to the point of real obsession, almost a sort of unhealthy obsession. It's a remarkable thing, yes. And she forms, I mentioned before this idea of anxiety in the Joan Fontaine character. Well, of course, the external pressure that is being applied onto Mrs. De Winter, and her relationship with Maxim. The external pressures, of course, being applied by Mrs. Danvers, and how she's just almost relentlessly provoking the new Mrs. De Winter, in that she is relentlessly reminding her and reminding us of the memory of Rebecca. And so, yes, Judith Anderson is the other key of this, for sure. So, Paula, thank you so much for that great comment. And just let me just continue here, and then I'll talk more about the what I think. So just really scrolling down. Sorry if I'm skipping your comment, but please keep up the conversations here. This is really great, really great. And let's see here. Just sorry, I just jumped down. Okay, so Vlad says, just finished it, found it very atmospheric and quite engaging. Felt like a twist was going to happen, and I liked where it went with the reveal. Je vous aime says, hello from Paris, hello from Paris. Oh, je vous aime. So I haven't spoken, my French is not so good, but bonjour, ça va bien? And DJ says, hey Daisuke. Hey DJ, how are you? And okay, just skipping around. And Je vous aime says there's a lot of fairy tales in this movie, references to Alice in Wonderland with a giant door or table, Cinderella or Bluebeard. Yeah, that's really interesting. I never really thought about that before, but yes, you're right. There are many elements and aspects that have a certain fairy tale aspect to it, and that I think create an atmosphere of, if anything, turning the Mrs. De Winter character into someone that is like a child. I maybe mentioned it before in passing, but the scenes with her and Manderley, and she's in the study, or she's wandering the halls, and I mean, it has a lot to do with Joan Fontaine's performance, yes, but the set decor makes her look childlike, and she is almost just dwarfed by the hugeness of the atmosphere, and it's a wonderful way to suggest to us the fact that she is really out of her element, out of her depth, and as a fairy tale element, yes, it's like she is entering into this wonderland, or maybe she is entering into a dangerous territory, who knows, but it does have that fairy tale element to it, and she is like a child, yes. Very interesting, Je vous aime. Thank you very much for that. And then My Cinematic Self, hello, welcome, it's nice to see you. Oh, congratulations, it's your wedding anniversary, so congratulations. Please, I hope, my best wishes to you. Thank you. And let's see. So, oh yes. Wolfgratz does mention is elements about yes, Maxim and what he actually does to Rebecca, and the issues about what there is a certain element there that Wolfgratz that mentions, but the film has, I think, a better approach to it. Yes, I don't want to talk too much about the versions, but yeah, there is a way in which the Maxim character is treated here, which I actually like. I actually like the way that Maxim's character is treated here, and the idea of him being a character that is not necessarily a murderer, but right, he is instead. Yeah, he didn't kill Rebecca, but he was a kind of. Rebecca kind of died, right, instead. But yeah, that's a very good point. And let's see. Sorry, I'm just skipping around here. Jared says, I love the performances. Olivier Fontaine and Anderson were perfectly cast. They're all equally fantastic. And then Paula says, what I love about this movie is how much is held back. There are a lot of quiet scenes without a lot of dialogue, but you can still feel the drama and emotion bubbling under. And excellent point. And Bruce Wayne, hello Bruce Wayne, says, my favorite Hitchcock movie. And Wolfgrat says, I love the way Fontaine spends so much time hugging herself or twitching. Yes, it's a good point. And also, I love her, the way that her face registers emotion and change. And it's a kind of like, what do you call it? Right, when there are moments when we see her face, and like it's her smile that's just frozen. When there's moments when she's so happy, and then suddenly she's totally crushed. Like I remember the moment that always gets to me so much. I feel so bad is when she is so happy. She is so happy at the moment when she is about to surprise Maxim with her costume for the ball. And you see, and the camera's following her, and she's going towards Maxim, and Maxim hasn't seen her yet. And then Maxim turns around and sees, and suddenly the shock, and then she realizes the terrible situation that she is now finding herself in. And then you see her face, and it was so happy for a moment, and suddenly it just crushed. She's so crushed, and it's all registered in her face. But there's no overbearing emotion there. It's almost like her face is caught in this horrific smile or something like that. And I feel the same is true in the opposite way, in the moment where Maxim reveals later in the film, when he reveals the truth about Rebecca and how he felt about Rebecca in the context of this film. And when he says, I hated her, and then the music's right as a dun dun dun, it just goes like, it just sticks to her, and it goes to her face, and she's shocked, right? Dun dun dun, and it stays on her. It's a very famous moment. It stays on her, but then as it slowly descends on her more and holds on her, because it's such a key moment, and we need to see what she reacts. Her shock curls into a very wry sort of smile, right? It's not overbearing. It's not, doesn't hit you over the head. I mean, the music does, but her face is, I think, just, if you saw that without the music, and you just looked at that shot without the music, because the music is very melodramatic. It's great, but it's very melodramatic. But if you just held that, saw that shot without the music, and you looked at her face, you could still see it's like, I mean, I can't do it very well, but she doesn't even do that. It's almost like the way the light is hitting her face or something. It's almost as though the same reaction that she has turns into a smile almost imperceptibly, which is, I think, I mean, it has to do with camera work, it has to do with lighting, of course, but it comes down primarily to the force and grace and just technical genius of Joan Fontaine's acting there. Amazing moment. And yes, and so the other thing I wanted to talk about, I'll get to the chat in a second, but the other thing I wanted to talk about as well is the idea of Hitchcock's style and Hitchcock's way in which he deals with suspenseful moments, etc. But I wanted to bring it up in the context of how he deals with the character of Rebecca. She was because Rebecca is dead. Rebecca is not alive in this film, and so the question therefore is, how effective do you think Hitchcock is in depicting the character of Rebecca, who is, of course, never shown on screen. We never, right? I don't think we ever see a picture of her. We see a portrait, and stuff, but we never actually know what it is she actually looks like in the flesh, as it were. So I find that to be a very fascinating aspect of Hitchcock's filmmaking, which is how he is able to bring the dead to life, at least in cinematic terms. What are some of the techniques in which he employs in order to bring the character of Rebecca to life? so to speak. The film is called Rebecca. We have characters like Mrs. Danvers and other characters talking about Rebecca. She's constantly on the minds of the characters here, certainly on the minds of the character of Joan Fontaine's, right, Mrs. De Winter, etc. And she's, what happens to her is the central focus of the entire film, especially the latter half, right? What happened to her? How did she die? What happened in the boat? What happened between her and Maxim? At least in the film version, in this Alfred Hitchcock Selznick film version. And how does Maxim feel about her? And that forms the crux of the relationship between him and Mrs. De Winter, right? So it all comes down to Rebecca. It all comes down to Rebecca. And so without Rebecca being her own entity, her own existing entity, as it were, I don't think this film would work at all. But it does, because Rebecca does seem to exist as a character in her own right. So how does Hitchcock do this? What are some moments that he does it? Well, there are some moments when, for example, when Maxim is talking in that scene about how she right, the scene in which he is talking about how Rebecca and he were talking, and this, by this point he is explaining to Mrs. De Winter exactly what kind of person Rebecca is, right? And there's a scene, right, where you have the camera following. This is the moment where just before they're having a final confrontation before Rebecca basically falls to the floor, and that's the last time that she's alive, essentially. And so he is recounting this, he is reenacting this moment. But rather than relying on a flashback, we rely on Maxim's telling of it. But as he's telling the story of this final confrontation between him and Rebecca, we see the camera chart the progress of Rebecca as she had acted, at least according to Maxim, right? So, she got up and she walked over and she's talking to him, and as he is recounting what as she is saying, the camera's tracking a blank area, but it's basically tracking the notion being that it's basically tracking what Rebecca would have been doing as Maxim is recounting that story of what she was doing. And so this is a moment, I think, in which she is coming alive. She is becoming alive before us on the screen. And there are other moments like this. I think she is almost alive in the way Mrs. Danvers is portrayed. I mentioned the moment earlier when Mrs. Danvers is very, not so subtly, trying to get Mrs. De Winter to kill herself, to throw herself out the window. And I said that we don't see her lips move as she is saying, why don't you? Why don't you? I mean, maybe we see a glimpse of it, but not all the time. It's sort of, we just hear it. And I think that it's almost as though it's not Mrs. Danvers talking, but it's like Rebecca talking. And so Mrs. Danvers as a character, but also as a kind of means by which the film can employ this sort of, Rebecca speaking through Mrs. Danvers, as it were. And that's why I think, I always like to think Mrs. Danvers is being almost not just obsessed with Rebecca, but also possessed by Rebecca, in a sense. Very, very interesting. Oh, and of course the way that Rebecca's name is mentioned almost constantly. I mean, I should do a count one of these days. I should watch the film again and just watch it just to count how many times the name Rebecca is mentioned. I'd love to do that. Maybe someone's done that already. If so, please let me know how many times Rebecca has been mentioned. On that point, I should say, I love the way Joan Fontaine pronounces the word Rebecca. I can't do it perfectly, but she says it almost like the second syllable. There's a slightly odd intonation there. I think maybe it's not just Rebecca, but it's almost like there's someone sometimes when Joan Fontaine says Rebecca. So I love that, and it just I don't know. Anyway, sorry about that. And right. So and every scene, I would say, well, not every scene. Oh yeah, every scene is to do with Rebecca. There is something to do with Rebecca in the scene, whether it's maybe just a passing mention of Rebecca or the tension between the characters in a particular scene having to do with the memory of Rebecca. So I think every moment has to do with Rebecca in some way or another. And the reason also why I think the idea of animating the inanimate, I think is a very important notion here, is because I do think Hitchcock has a great way of doing this, and there are so many films later in his career, or even earlier perhaps, I don't know, but there are so many other films, and I don't want to go through them all entirely here, because that's not the point of this live stream film chat, but just very briefly, just think about other films in Hitchcock's filmography where we see characters, or we have characters that are never actually seen in the flesh on camera later on in his filmography. So I don't want to say too much, but there are other films in his filmography that are very famous, and we see characters, or they have characters that are actually never seen. They're spoken of a lot, but they're actually never seen. So I think Rebecca is just another example of Hitchcock doing this, and I like to think of it as he is using cinema to bring the dead to life, to bring someone who's dead back to life. And I think that way of thinking about it and how he uses his cinema to bring the dead Rebecca back to life. I love to think about it that way, because that is very, it complements, PLE, complements the reading of the film that I think some of you are espousing, which is it's almost like a ghost story. It's a haunting ghost story. And I said before, it's not directly a supernatural ghost horror story, that's for sure. But we are talking about a dead person, and it's this dead person that is, in essence, forming the dramatic bonds that exist among all of these characters. So we are talking about bringing the dead to life. Rebecca is, to put it in extreme language, she is a zombie in this film, and so, and Hitchcock, I think, brings her to life in a very interesting way. It's also, of course, to do with the way in which Rebecca is treated, the character's treated, in the underlying story, of course, and in the script. But that's another thing too. That's a very interesting thing too. What do you make of the fact that we never see Rebecca? We never see her. She's always spoken of, but we never see her. Of course, I think the immediate comment to make about that would be that the fact that we never see her means that her memory becomes all the more powerful, at least in my mind, because I like, she is described as being so beautiful, and she's described as being such an unattainable thing, an unattainable memory, that I have to imagine someone who is just the most beautiful woman in the world. And I think that can be different things to different people, right? So, but for me, I can imagine something. But to be perfectly honest, when I think of Rebecca in my mind, I never associate kind of a face. Isn't that weird? I don't know what do you think of when you think of Rebecca? When I think of Rebecca in my mind, I don't think of a particular face or visage. I think more of, like, when I think of her, yeah, that's weird. I never thought about that before. But when I try to imagine what Rebecca looks like, I can't come up with a concrete image. I can't. It's more just a feeling, or a kind of, when I'm trying to imagine what she's looking like now, I like, there's a blank spot where her head is. I can see this, I can feel this image of Rebecca, but I can't conjure up her face. That is very interesting. I don't know how you feel. What do you think of when you try to imagine what Rebecca must have been like when she was alive? That's very interesting. I think of that R, the R, which is right. It's a facsimile representation here, right? The R, but I always think of that as a kind of I always think when I think of Rebecca and what she might have looked at, I always think of like her body like her body might have been in the shape of an R or something. I don't know. I always think of that in some odd way, but maybe maybe to suggest a kind of I don't know, body type perhaps, but the reason why I think that is because that's what I'm given, right? I can't, I only see the R, I only see the things, I only see the nightgown, I only see I only hear about what she wore and how she acted, and we never see what she actually looked like, and that creates even more mystery, and it built her up in a way that is incredible, and thus I think that is another way in which this film creates or gives her life, really, in a very ironic way. It gives her life by not giving her life at all, if you know what I mean. In other words, it gives her life by not showing us one single thing about what she looked like. So I think that's really fascinating, and it's a very interesting way in which cinema works. But it's also, of course, right, a very this is how things work when we read books, or at least when I read books. We are never given, when we read a novel, usually it might not have a picture or something, so we have to conjure it up in our minds and stuff. But it's an interesting thing with when I read a book, versus when I'm trying to deal with Rebecca as what she might have looked like, right? Because when I read a book and a novel, everything is equal. In other words, I'm never given pictures of what some characters look like versus other characters. Everything is equal. So it's all on the same playing field. So I can therefore imagine what maybe this character looks like, and then when this character comes into a novel, I can imagine what that character looks like, and etc. So then it forms a kind of way in which I can imagine what people look like in the scenarios that they are engaged with, as described in the novel. Here in the film, what I'm trying to convey is that we know what these other characters look like: Mrs. Danvers, Maxim de Winter, Mrs. de Winter. We know what these other characters look like, but we don't know what Rebecca looks like. So it's not all on the same level playing field, if you know what I mean. We're already given the physical descriptions, and by virtue of the fact that we see their faces on screen, but we never see Rebecca, and so that's why I have that reaction, which is I can never fully be able to imagine what it is that Rebecca looks like. Even now, I'm trying to imagine it, and I can't do it. And so, anyway, let me just stop there, and let's continue with the live chat. So again, I apologize for if I skip over your comment here, but I'll do the best as I can. So anyway, let's see. Going here, Vlad says Mrs. De Winter is a very good example of characters that I always love to root for in films. Female leads like her: Rosemary from Rosemary's Baby, Carol from Repulsion. So this is a very good point. She is very likable from the get-go, I think. She's just so earnest, and it's great, she is so likable that the other characters become so unlikable. Mrs. Van Hopper, Mrs. Danvers, of course, but Mrs. Van Hopper, I think from the very beginning, she is a kind of a sub-villain in the film, because she is in many ways quite antagonistic towards the young. Well, she isn't Mrs. De Winter yet, but she's a Joan Fontaine character. So I agree. And then her character grows in confidence as the story progresses, says Genealogy Mad. So yes, absolutely fantastic. And Wolfgrat says, and when Mrs. De Winter finally stands up for herself and enters Rebecca's room, it so nearly ends in disaster that makes it all the more impressive when she finally stands up to Maxim over the inquest. Yes, the inquest. So, right, by that time, of course, in the film, she has already gained her confidence, right, because of the truth. And then from that point on, she is more confident. And it's great, too, she is able to assert herself more over, especially in Maxim's affairs and what she is doing. And right, it leads to that famous scene, which is borrowed directly from the book, I think, of course, but it's the famous scene between the two of them. And Maxim's line, I always, I can't get it correctly. If I'm misquoting, I apologize. But right, it's the famous line where he says, they're together before in front of the fireplace, and he says, he's looking at her, and this is towards the end of the film. And by this time, things are starting to unravel with respect to the truth behind Rebecca, but there's still the mystery about what actually happened in the boat, and the holes in the bottom of the boat, and all that stuff. They were made from the inside. But what does he say? Right? He says, he looks at her face, Mrs. De Winter's face, and he says, it's gone forever. That funny, young, lost look I loved. It won't ever come back. I killed that when I told you about Rebecca. It's gone. In a couple of hours, you've grown so much older. Right? So I think, that's the key line, right? Because it shows not only the emotional growth of Joan Fontaine's character upon the revelations about certain things happening, but it also is suggestive, of course, of a kind of confidence, a growing up, if you will, of Joan Fontaine's character, which I think lends itself also very nicely to the earlier comment made by, I think, Je vous aime, about how this is almost like a fairy tale and she's almost like a child. Well, now she is growing up in a certain sense of that phrase, but for Maxim, right, that funny young lost look that he loved is no longer there. And in exchange for her gaining confidence, she seems to have lost something, whatever that something may have been, that attracted him to her in the first place. So yes, that is a really great moment. Before I forget, I really should mention this. I know it's a random thing, but one of the moments I really love, for what, I don't know why, it means so much to me every time I see it. And I think I might have mentioned this in an earlier video, but let me just bring it up here. I love the moment early in the film where the two of them are there. It's in they're in France, right? And Mrs. Van Hopper is in bed with a cold, so the Joan Fontaine character is having breakfast by herself. And is it breakfast or lunch? I forget. I think it's breakfast, but or maybe it's lunch. I forget. But what did the menu say? Was it le petit déjeuner? I forget. But anyway, they're having a meal in the hotel, and she's by herself. But then she has a little bit of an accident on the table, and so Maxim invites her to join him, and she's talking about what's going on, and then the conversation then goes to her and what happened to her, and about her father and how he died the previous year. And she's talking about her father, and she's talking about how he was a painter, and how he was, she thought he was a good painter, but that he was probably misunderstood. And she said that he painted the same tree over and over again. And she was describing him as being, he had a theory that if you, have something that you love, whether it be a person or a thing or something, that you should stick to it. And so I really like that. I love that story about her father, because it reveals so much. Not only is her acting so stupendous, right? Look at that moment when she describes how, my father died last spring, and her just face is trying to hide the obvious sorrow that she must be feeling even now. But I just love that moment when she's talking about her father and his theory as a painter, how if you find something that you love, you should stick to it. And he stuck to the same tree over and over and painted over and over again. That's such a lovely story. But anyways, let's just continue here. So, okay, so returning to the chat here, Jared says, I feel the new Mrs. De Winter brings out something Maxim which he sort of needs as a way to begin to get over Rebecca. It's not exactly said in what that is, but we see it in Olivier's performance. Peter says, she seems overly frightened for half of the film. Yes, that's frightened. That's a good way of describing it. Wolfgrat says, there's an interesting feminist debate over just what Maxim wants from Mrs. De Winter, the second Mrs. De Winter. Is it tenderness and love or someone he can dominate? I'm with the former, but he does tend to infantilize her somewhat. That's a good point. I mean, there's also the just to bring this up. There's also the notion of, what's the like the second Mrs. De Winter's existence, at least how it's presented in this film, is she seems to the way in which she grows up, so to speak, is essentially based on entirely based on how she feels about Maxim, or how, in other words, how, right? In other words, it's like her own personal growth is basically based upon her relationship with her husband. And so, I mean, I've heard criticisms, right, and I think very legitimate criticisms of this film, but also of this underlying story, right, about what is it about this that forms the identity of Mrs. De Winter, right? I mean, she is her own being. She is her own thinking human being, of course. So why is it that her whole existence seems to be tied entirely around what this man thinks of her? So I think that's a fair, legitimate criticism to make of this film, but I think that's a criticism also of the story more than anything else. But I don't know. I don't have anything against that particular line of criticism, actually, and I don't dismiss it. And the idea of what Maxim wanted out of his relationship with the second Mrs. De Winter, I mean, that's right. I don't. Let me put it this way. I don't think that the romance aspect of the film it's not necessarily presented in a way that's 100% all roses and sunshine, if you will. I mean, there is room for the interpretation, and legitimately so, reasonably so, that Maxim might have, I don't think bad intentions is the right word, because I don't think he has bad intentions, but he does have this way of looking down on Mrs. De Winter. And in fact, the line that I recited, that funny young lost look I loved is gone, right? And that suggests that he always saw her as a child. Right? He always saw her as just someone who was not on the same level as him. And I don't mean that necessarily as being he was always putting her down or anything like that. I mean, maybe I really think that as a character, at least as he's portrayed in this film, he truly had genuine affection for her. But certainly he looked down upon her in a way that she seemed like a child. And so, yes, to consider her as a almost infant, I think that's a good way of interpreting it. Now, then the question is that a criticism of this film? I mean, I think for some people it could be, and if so, that's fine. I don't know. I sort of step back and I say, right, when you're thinking about all the relationships that exist in the entirety of the world, I mean, they're not all quote unquote perfect, right? I mean, there are some relationships where some people have certain feelings and views about themselves vis-a-vis the other. Maybe some people are in relationships where they look down on the other person. Maybe vice versa. Some people are in relationships where they feel like they're being looked down by the other person. And then there's some relationships that both partners are on quote unquote equal sort of emotional playing field. And so it really depends on how you view certain relationships. Of course, when you're looking at cinema, we are always, at least I'm always trying to seek the ideal, the perfect situation. And when it strays from that, I can sometimes, there's the potential for me feeling disappointed, and thus I can want to criticize it. But I certainly see that reading. I'm not sure yet whether or not I would join in the criticism, as it were. Although I do appreciate that kind of line of criticism, that's for sure, if it does appear. So, Wolfgratz, thank you very much for that. And then Genealogy Matt says, I think Mrs. De Winter's guilt leads to him abdicating his power over his home. The closed-off room belonging to Rebecca, Mrs. Danvers gains ascendance by default. Her power is out of kilter. Yes, that's very interesting. Miss Maxim is almost completely out of the picture when it comes to the inner workings of Manderley. And so all the power seems to have been given to Mrs. Danvers almost by default. And Juvuzem says, in the next Hitchcock's movie, Suspicion, Joan is so beautiful. She's a real great beauty in that picture. Suspicion is a bit underrated. Yes, that's a great film. I really like that one too, with Cary Grant, yes. And then Peter says, oh boy, to bring in 21st century feminist ideals to a 1940s film doesn't seem fair. That's a good point too, Peter. And I agree with what you're saying. I also can see the other side of the coin, though, because, yeah, I can see both sides of the issue. So, yeah, this is great. And then Wolfgrat says, of course, we never get Rebecca's story. Of necessity, given the lack of flashbacks, we only ever hear Maxim or Danny or Flavel, etc. Her real voice is unheard. Yes, this is a very good point. Her entirety, the entirety of her existence, the way she actually was, is never given to us. So yes, I'm just skipping over the chat here. Sorry about this. If I skip over your comment, I really apologize. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about this. Gosh, what great comments here. This is so great. Thank you so much for this. Okay, so thank you. Okay, just go ahead. Darkmaster, hello, Darkmaster. Laserdisc. Oh, Darkmaster. Okay, yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for your comment here about Citizen Kane, I think. So yes, thank you. So if you have any more info about that, yeah, well, I'll talk with you if you want at that video. So thank you. It's nice to see you, by the way, and my best regards. Thank you very much, Darkmaster. I really appreciate it. But let's see. Let's see. So then Tim. Oh, okay, Paul says, Rebecca may not have been ideal as a spouse, but I bet she was great at parties. I bet she was too. Yes, she was certainly she was apparently a very successful socialite. So, and then Tim says, was Mrs. Danvers a lesbian? What do you all think? And Wolfgratz, yes, the discussion seems to be going in this way. You know, I think we do see this in the production details. With respect to the making of this film, Rebecca, and the topic of the potential or of Mrs. Danvers being not just infatuated with Rebecca, but being right. They were there is the notion, right, or there's the possibility or the reading that yes, Mrs. Danvers and Rebecca. Or maybe just Mrs. Danvers' sexuality comes into play. And so I think it does come up in the production notes, and I think the way in which it was resolved in the film is that any of those elements that might have existed or that could exist, are probably, or not probably, they are sort of taken away, and they're not presented directly in the film. But I think that reading is certainly possible. Um, uh, right. What is the reason that Mrs. Danvers is infatuated with the memory of Rebecca? Right. I mean, we're talking about, of course, that she is, but why is she? I mean, within the universe of the film, and why is she so infatuated with Rebecca? What is the reason by which she's infatuated with Rebecca? I mean, there are other people who loved Rebecca, at least the way that they related to her, and so, but no one has, at least outwardly anyway, not even George Sanders, right? The Flavel character, not even he exhibits the same level of real frightening devotion towards Rebecca that Mrs. Danvers seems to suggest, to show. And so the question is why? Why does she love Rebecca so much? Right. And so I leave it up to you to sort of figure that, or to think about that. Why does she love Rebecca so much? I mean, is there something emotional? Was there an emotional bond between the two of them? I think there is a suggestion that there might have been. Is it basically that she is just Mrs. That's the way that Mrs. Danvers is as a her personality? I think there's a suggestion that that could be. That could be the case. Is it a combination of that and other factors? I think that's also the case as well. So, yes, very possible. The why, if you will, it's never quite given to us, but yes, it's never expressed. But it's something that I think we can determine, or we can try to interpret. Based on our own personal readings of the film, and also the underlying book. So yes, and then Peter says, I think the mansion is the largest I've seen in any film. Tim says, yes, the mansion is essentially another main character of the film. So this is Manderley. The atmosphere and the performances, says Jared, truly give the film such a unique experience. And okay. So. Okay, I'm sorry, Jack Clare. Jack, hello, my friend. I forgot to watch this film. Have fun discussing it. I'll be here for 8.5 for sure. So see you next time, Jack. No problem, my friend. Please, everyone, let's thank Jack. Jack Clare is our friend. Jack Clare is the reason why this film club exists, primarily because he was the first one to suggest it to me. And so Jack deserves our thanks. So whenever you see Jack, make sure you give him the proverbial pat on the back, and just let him know, just say hello and thank him, and just welcome him, because he's really helped me out. So Jack, thank you so much, and I hopefully see you next week. Razor Wire reviews, Luke. Okay, great comment. One I've seen. All I'll contribute is Joan Fontaine is wonderful and utterly beautiful. Great film that I need to revisit. Razor Wire reviews, my friend, my hero and mentor in many ways. So it's good to see you. Oh yes. So, and just as a side note, yes, it would be great to see Mulholland Drive live stream from Luke one of these days. It would be great to do that. I will definitely join that one. Don't drink all the Coke. So, and then Wolfgratz is talking about the character. Yes, Flavel, of course, Flavel. I thought Flavel was lovely, so confident in his charm and silky tones, whilst all the time nobody, including Rebecca, ever falls for his facade. Yes, Flavel. I love Flavel. He is so slimy, and he always kind of gets what he, right when he, after, I think it's that first session of the inquest, and Maxim is about to explode, but then Mrs. De Winters faints, and they go out and they break for session, and they go out and they go into their car, and then Flavel comes in. And that scene where Flavel is essentially going to blackmail Maxim, because Flavel believes that Maxim murdered Rebecca because of the boat, and because he has the information that he thinks is the case in the film, right? That he thinks that Rebecca was going to have a baby, and so therefore there wouldn't been any notion of Rebecca wanting to kill herself. On the contrary, it would have been that she wanted to live, and therefore, based on what Flavel suspects Maxim doing, that Flavel thinks that Maxim actually murdered Rebecca in the film, right? And so, yes, that scene where he essentially invites himself in to eat out of their picnic basket. And I love how the two of them are just sitting there, and he's just eating the chicken. I think it's the chicken. And he's so slimy and so unlikable. And yet there is something of a charm about him. And yes, you're right. Rebecca never fell for it. And, Mrs. Danvers also knows this. He calls him Max, and also Mrs. Van Hopper calls him Max, and so we have sort of the villains of the piece, as it were, the sub-villains, as it were, calling him Max instead of Maxim. That's an interesting thing, but. What was I saying? Yeah, so Flavel. Yes, but what I loved about him was the moment where they go to the doctor at the end, and the truth comes out in the film, right? The truth comes out that it wasn't that she was going to have a child, but it was the fact that she discovered that she had cancer, and that she didn't have long to live, and so the shock that is registered on Flavel's face, it's true, genuine emotional shock. And I find that moment, he is so human in that moment, and I really admire the performance there, because it's so true to life, and it makes him so likable as a character, or not likable, but I feel very sympathetic towards him at that particular moment. Great moment. But then what's so brilliant is right after that moment, right, we cut to him, and we see him going to a telephone, and he is calling Manderley and talking to Danny, right, Mrs. Danvers, and telling her what happened, right, and it was that Rebecca let us both down, right. It was, and I just love the way he just flippantly just says, cancer or something like that, and so now the two of them are going to live happily ever after, that sort of thing. And so he turns back into his slightly villainous ways towards the end. It's subtle, but I love the way that our sympathies can turn on him. He's more times than not very unlikable, and then there are flashes and moments where he becomes almost very sympathetic, and then he turns back to his slightly villainous ways. And so I love, yes, Flavel, what a performance. Yes, the way he just hops into rooms, through windows, and he just basically intrudes upon the scene, just hopping through a door when he's not invited, or entering a car when he's not invited. He always seems to enter a scene. He doesn't seem no one wants him there, but he's just imposing himself on everyone. I love that. That's such a what a great character. Yes. Okay, just keep going here. So Patrick Doherty, yes, nice to see you, Patrick. You're saying definitely one of the greatest reveals ever. I didn't see it coming. Let's see. RetroPlayer72, hello. Just the film has just finished, and wow, even better than I remembered. And just keep going. Luis Salas, hello. It's nice to see you. I'm glad to see you. Welcome. Okay. Yes. Okay. So. Okay, Wolfgratz. RetroPlayer72 says Rebecca's ghost lives on in the remaining characters in different ways. That's a very good point, my friend. Yes, each character deals with Rebecca in his or her own unique way, that forms their kind of character arc, which I think is very. I think they're all in different places at the beginning, and maybe Rebecca, I'm sorry, maybe Mr. and Mrs. Danvers, I'm sorry, not Danvers, Mr. and Mrs. De Winter are in the same place by the end of the film, but they're certainly in a different place than Mrs. Danvers, that's for sure. Let's see, Vlad says, another one of my favorite scenes was when he was recalling their fight and the camera was following it around the room as if she was there, wonderfully made. Yes, that's a very famous scene, and I do cite that scene as being a way in which Hitchcock is bringing the dead back to life through the medium of cinema. And Genealogy Matt says, good observation, Vlad. Yes, I agree. And Retroplayer 72 does agree as well. Fantastic. And I'm sorry, just keep going here. Jared says, Mrs. Danvers truly seems to be possessed by Rebecca. She truly gives a haunting performance, and it truly seems that she helps to keep the haunting atmosphere in the house alive. Cine Art says, I love this film, one of Hitchcock's many masterpieces, and completely dreamlike and atmospheric throughout. Very different to any Hitchcock in the use of music, characters, and tone. Cine Arts, that's a very good point. Yes, very good point. And Cine Arts, hold on, sorry about this. Cine Arts, hold on for 1 second here. I just want to say, Cine Arts' channel is really great. Cine Arts, it's one word, Cinearts. I think the A is capitalized. So Cine Arts, really great channel. Please check it out if you can. Hold on for 1 second here. Yes, I'm just pulling up Cine Arts' channel right now on a separate window, and yeah, great. There's so many great videos. Oh gosh, hold on. Yeah, I'm pulling up Cine Arts' yeah, the Police Academy films. Yeah. I'm sorry, this is not a Police Academy live stream, but the Police Academy film. So anyway, that is just one example of many great videos on Cine Arts' channel. So please check it out if you can. Cine Arts, thank you very much. Okay, let's see here. Genealogy Mad mentions Jane Eyre. Vlad says, I've been on a Hitchcock kick recently. Rewatched Psycho, which I loved. Saw The Birds for the first time, which let me down quite a bit, to be honest. And now saw Rebecca. And says you'll see Dial M for Murder as well. Great, great. Yes, Jared Wignall says, the fact that we never see her just makes her presence even bigger than you initially realize. Yes, yes, I agree 100% with you, Jared. Well said, my friend. And speaking of which, let's just if you see Jared, just just give him just again. If you want to have a great time talking on YouTube, you got to talk to Jared. You got to check his channel out, and you got to just talk to him, because he gives you so much of his time and his energy and his thoughts. Great. I think his are, among the most numerous and long of the comments that I receive. I mean, I receive a lot of great comments, but I think he is a contender for being the one that comments the most, and he gives so many great comments to me. So Jared, I owe Jared so much. So when you see Jared, you gotta thank him, and just let him know that we really appreciate him, and go to his channel and check his videos out, and just Jared, I think you're great, so thank you very much. And you always have a great way of expressing you have a better way of expressing what it is I want to say. I want to say the same thing, but you have a better way of expressing it all the time. So thank you very much, Jared. So I agree. I agree that her presence, Rebecca's presence, and the fact that we don't see her makes it so much greater in our minds. And let's see. Yeah. RetroPlayer72 says, every character in the film and we only get the true Rebecca at the end. Yes. Paula says, same exactly. I never picture Rebecca either. Yes, so I'm talking about not being able to imagine what Rebecca looks like. How funny, because I never even thought about that until you mentioned it, Dice. Go, yeah, I never thought about that too until just now, Paula. So, right, it's really odd. And it's I don't feel the same way about novels, but the novels work on a similar principle. But it's weird how I don't feel that way about novels, but I feel that way about this film and the inability of being able to imagine what she looks like. But really interesting. And now there's a great discussion in the chat I see about favorite Hitchcock films. Great. Malachite's here. Thank you very much, Malachite. It's nice to see you. Roman Haberstock. It's nice to see you, my friend. I hope you're doing well. And there's discussion here about, yes, Hitchcock. Okay, I just pushed the button and then it goes back to the bottom. I'm so sorry. Hold on. So, yes. And there's discussion about Hitchcock's films here. And great. I don't want to get too much into other Hitchcock films here. Of course, please feel free to do so in the chat. Don't worry about that. But I don't want to just talk about it. And if I do, I might tend to talk too much, and I don't want to miss. I don't want to give anything away, or I don't want to spoil anything about a film that someone might not have seen. So, but just in general terms, in very general terms, I can say that as far as other Hitchcock films are concerned, yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think Rebecca's certainly up there. Lady Vanishes is up there. Notorious certainly is up there. That's probably my second favorite Hitchcock film. Notorious. Vertigo. I mean, I've spoken about Vertigo. I haven't spoken about it directly, but Vertigo is, it's the film for me. Psycho, The Birds. To be perfectly honest, Marnie, not so much. Everything post Marnie is a bit. Even Frenzy. I mean, I like Frenzy, but I still have some. Well, I don't want to talk too much about that, but and I'm actually starting to feel I'm starting to turn around on a film like Topaz. I think Topaz is a much more experimental film than I had first given it credit when I had seen it. It actually, the more I think about it, the more I realize that Topaz as a film is very experimental, very, very experimental. But I'm sorry, I shouldn't. But Rear Window, brilliant. Strangers on a Train, brilliant. And 39 Steps, The Man Who Knew Too Much. In fact, I like the James Stewart version, Doris Day James Stewart version, a little bit more than the British version, the Peter Lorre version. But anyway, and then Rebecca's still up there. So anyway, so there's Hitchcock. So one of these is I really should do more films about Hitchcock, but that is another. That is a topic for another video, I suppose. But anyway. And yes, so there is yeah, Wolfgrat says, oh yes, they did Flavel a favor by cutting his "is cancer catching" line. Yeah, as it stands, he looks genuinely shaken, upset for Rebecca. Yes, he does have that that kind of undercurrent of insensibility, if you will, runs through in the scene later when he's on the phone. The way in which he throws away the line about cancer. So it's almost like, it's not like he's looking at it in a very selfish light. Rebecca let me down by having cancer. I mean, that's the implication. And so I think there's a similar kind of vibe that's going on in that particular scene, Wolfgratz. But it's not a direct thing like what you're suggesting, which I completely agree with. I completely agree with it. Okay, so je vous aime. Maybe you've left already, but thank you very much. It'll be great to see you again. Goodbye, farewell, and see you again very soon. Je vous aime. Yeah, great, great, great. Oh yes, so CineArts. So CineArts. So people are saying that people are subscribing to CineArts. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah. So it's I might have to leave a little bit early because the battery power is getting low, and I might have to walk my dog soon. So maybe we'll leave in about 5 or 10 minutes. Is that okay? So I'm seeing that the. Okay. So great. Okay. So let's. Oh yeah, so then CineArts, yes, of course, CineArts. Please join. Please check out his channel because it's really great. I I I I love his Police Academy videos. I think he's the only person on YouTube who has gone through the entire Police Academy series and ranked them. It's one of my dreams, actually, and I'm being very serious. I'm not being facetious at all. It's one of my dreams to do a Police Academy rank video. But that's a topic for another day. And anyway, let's go back to Rebecca. So just as closing for the film Rebecca, what I want to say is, how should I put it? I guess what I want to say is, I want to return to my initial question, which was, do you think that this film, well, how should I put it? Well, let me explain it like this. When I opened the conversation by saying that for me, growing up, it was a film that I thought was maybe not so good, but then I tended to like it even more. And then I liked it even more. But then I found it difficult at first to find a kind of direct connection with it on a level that I could understand and how it could maybe impact my own life. But then I looked at it through the lens of, let's say, emotional anxiety or anxiety in trying to understand what the other is thinking and not ever being able to, as a kind of a crisis of existing and never ever being able to know what someone else is thinking. And I think that this film does this in a very interesting way. Of course, it unfolds also in a very gothic romance and melodramatic plot, which is not a bad thing. It's a great thing. But and so so I think there is a great sense of what do you call it? There's a great sense of storytelling here, first and foremost. But there is also room for the film to affect me on a personal level, on a direct level. And again, not because I've gone through the same kinds or similar kinds of experiences as the Joan Fontaine character or anything like that, but more on a level of, again, this kind of anxiety in a relationship and feeling not quite knowing what it is that one is trying to get out of this relationship, and and then whether or not the Joan Fontaine character is actually, if she really knows what she's getting herself into, or is it or perhaps we spoke about how Mrs. Danvers was perhaps a little bit too maybe too obsessed with Rebecca. Well, do you think the same could be said for the Joan Fontaine character as well? Do you think that maybe she is too obsessed with Maxim? I mean, I've spoken, of course, in glowing terms about her character because I really love her character, and I think she's very likable, and Joan Fontaine is so charming and beautiful, of course. But I mean, now that I think about it, when we're talking about anxiety and obsession, Mrs. Danvers and Joan Fontaine's character, I don't think are that far apart. I mean, perhaps they are much closer than one might think at first. And so, in that sense, maybe I can see a little bit of myself in Mrs. Danvers. Or to put it another way, maybe Mrs. Danvers' story is not so foreign to my own views and feelings and experiences with respect to how I feel about someone else in whatever relationship I'm thinking about, whether it's a family relationship or a friend relationship or a romantic relationship or something like that. So maybe we can look at this film as ways in which relationships are being examined, and the different kinds of variations on that particular theme. I mean, I don't know if it's true for all the characters, but I think primarily we're dealing with the Joan Fontaine character as one example of how to view a relationship with someone else vis-a-vis the other. In her case, it's Maxim de Winter. And then, on the other hand, how Mrs. Danvers views or is in a relationship with the other. In her case, it's Rebecca. And in fact, I think that parallel holds water in more ways than one, right? Because if we think about the story as it unfolds in this film, Rebecca, right? The story of Joan Fontaine's character, the second Mrs. de Winter, is that she is so obsessed with Maxim and that she has almost a misconception of what Maxim is really thinking. She always thought that Maxim really loved Rebecca, but in the end, she realizes that the truth was actually not that at all. It was the fact that that he hated her. Okay, so her whole worldview was suddenly shattered in one moment, in a delightful way. Of course, it turned out great for her in the end, at least in what she was looking for at that particular point in her life. With Mrs. Danvers, the same is true, right? Because Mrs. Danvers was so in love with Rebecca, obsessed with Rebecca, in love with Rebecca, infatuated with Rebecca, in love with Rebecca, and yet her whole worldview was in essence shattered, perhaps, by the revelation about Rebecca and her past, and about the truth, and it was also shattered by the fact that Maxim and the second Mrs. de Winter were going to find happiness, and in fact Rebecca's memory was going to die, and she couldn't have that. So that led to, or we assume that leads to her ultimate decision in causing the fire to Manderley, because that's the assumption that we were given in the movie, which was in fact it was she who initiated the fire and the burning down of Manderley. And so in fact we can see the variations on the theme, how the outlook, how one views the other, and the inability and perhaps even disappointment in which we face when we are trying to understand and comprehend the other. And we see this with Mrs. de Winter, and we see this with Mrs. Danvers. And so I find that to be a very rich way of watching the film for me, because it gives me this way, to the film that is like, how should I put it? It gives it a kind of a, not contemporary spin, but it gives it almost it allows me to enjoy it on a very direct and personal level that might affect me. And so I think, that is a way that I really like to view it. But excuse me for 1 second here. All right, I have to get going soon because my battery power is running a little bit low, but I will close it out by just looking at the comments here, and then we'll call it a day. So there's yes, I'm returning to the chat room discussion, and yes, oh, Sean Gallagher, yes, you've joined just in time, so yes, no problem. Caught up assembling furniture for my girlfriend. I hope the furniture was assembled with great success, Sean. So it's nice to see you. And gosh, great. Yes, and Wolfgratz says, well, Maxim is a wonderful substitute for a father figure. So there's that. Yes. Yes, Wolfrat says, how must Danny feel discovering that Rebecca held back the truth from her? It's a terrible moment for someone who's invested everything into their relationship. Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. And so I completely agree. This it must have been such a devastating experience. Something that right, Rebecca held back. She didn't share this thing with Danny, and so that was enough, I think. And then plus compounding that would be the whole fact that Mrs. De Winter, the second Mrs. De Winter, has won, and so and she can't have that now. Now can she? So. Yes, yes. Well done, Wolfgratz. Well done, and Wolfgratz too. Again, I should say Wolfgratz is our friend. Wolfgratz is a great contributor. He is so smart, so intelligent, and so funny. And I always find that I'm just trying to catch up with him because everything he says is just so brilliant. Wolfgratz, you please, everyone out there, when you talk to Wolfgratz, you just tell him our thanks and appreciation. He comments a lot, so Wolfgratz saying, and for all of you out on Parking Lot 1918, nice to see you. Well done, thank you. It's great, great. And so then the question is, Isaac Dunn and Paula, you're asking about Eclipse series. Is it possible to have Eclipse films in the future? That's a good question. So let me just end the Rebecca discussion now. So thank you very much for joining me for Rebecca. And next week is 8.5. And then after that is the Red Shoes. And then after that, I haven't made any plans or announcements yet because I don't quite know what I'm going to do. I guess what I can do is I can try to think about it. Again, I should try to think of more of a theme, but I will certainly keep Eclipse films in mind. I think that would be a great one. There are so many Eclipse sets available. If I were to do an Eclipse set film, I don't think I would have enough time to talk about all the films in an Eclipse set, although it might also be a good idea to have all the Eclipse set films into one film stream. But then at the same time, that's difficult because you run the risk of maybe some people have seen some films and not others. And so therefore, if we're talking about details about some films that people haven't seen, then people might be spoiled and things like that. So maybe it'll maybe just be one film. And then, yeah, Eclipse sets are fair game, of course. I didn't think about that because I think for this first month I just wanted to pick, how should I put it, sort of well-known films, so to speak, or films that I think are readily available and accessible by all or by as many people. And so I picked the ones that I picked, and they fall rather early in the Criterion Collection physical media order anyway. So yeah, but the Eclipse series films are definitely fair game, and so let me think about it and get back to you. Please note, I will make an announcement about this later, but July, I will be away for about a week. I think I need to take the family on a vacation, so I'll be away in the middle of July. But so I don't think I'll be able to do film club live streams every week in July. But I'll certainly do the ones that I can. And I'll try to schedule them on different days or something if the time is inconvenient. But anyway, my friends, thank you very much to all of you here. And let me just go to the chat, and then we'll call it a day. So great, and yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Gosh. Oh gosh, yes. You guys are, wow. I can barely keep up with the chat. It's so wonderful. So anyway, my friends, thank you very much for this. And I just want to say once again that this is not the end of the discussion, but this is just the beginning of the discussion. And, what I say is not in any way meant to be authoritative, or it's meant to be the be-all, end-all mic drop moment or anything like that. It's supposed to just be a way for me to hear what you have to say. And so hopefully this is just the start of the conversation for you amongst yourselves and your friends here, and also and your other film fan circles on YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook, and the like. So please keep the conversations going, and I hope you have a lot of great conversations. And also, don't be afraid of doing your own live stream film chats if you want. If you make an announcement a little bit ahead of time, or if you want to send me a link or something like that, if I can make it the time, I'll certainly join. And I'd love to join in on the conversations. It's fun to have these film chats, even if it's it's much. If you have a lot of people, it's great. If you have like just a few people, I think it's great. It's fun to talk about film with 5 people, 10 people, 20 people. And it's fun to talk about film with just one person. You know what I mean? So if you're interested, I encourage you to give it a try, or give it just to see what if it works out, and have your own film discussions and live streams and the like. And if so, I'd love to join. So you can always send me an invite if you don't mind me joining you and being there. So anyway, my friends, let me let you go. And once again, let me say thank you very much. Thank you so much for your time. It's been fun, and I look forward to seeing you next week. So until then, my friends, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on doing what it is you do, which is be great cinephiles and enthusiastic film fans, and spread the word, right? Cinema is great. So anyway, my friends, thank you, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are. So cheers. All right, we're done. So thank you. Okay, so look forward to seeing you all next week. So thank you very much for the chat, my friends. It's been fun. And okay, so see you very soon. So I'm gonna turn this off here. All right. This is the one. This is the moment I'm so scared of. If I think I've turned off the video, but I haven't. So if I think I've turned off the video, but I haven't, it might mean like it's secretly recording something that I don't want to be. If I'm like, I don't know, doing something I don't want to have shown on YouTube. So I have to be sure that I'm turning this off. Let's see. So okay, all right. Where's the button? Here we go. All right. So take care, my friends, and talk to you soon. Bye bye. And is it off? It's not off.